When you are having a strategic planning session, something like a military operation, you need to have precision, clarity. There's no room for ambiguity or beating around the bush. You've just got to get to the brass tacks and make sure everyone is on the same page. And so today, we're just going to jump in to the straight talk. So you ready? Operation 611, here's what we're talking about, is that as Christianity continues to decline as a cultural force in America, those who follow Jesus Christ have to be as clear-sighted as possible as to the reasons why. And it is very tempting and it's emotionally satisfying to blame the increasing irrelevance of Christianity on external threats, bogeymen like liberal values or Hollywood or conspiracy theories. But I am convinced that the reason for the decline of Christianity in America, the main reason, is internal. That as a group, Christians have deviated from our marching orders, from the tactical plan that God laid out in Scripture for us to be influencers. And I believe this because, after all, the first 300 years of Christianity's existence, it exploded in cultural power. In spite of the fact that Christianity was a tiny minority persecuted in the Empire of Rome, and yet quickly it became a world-changing force. And they did it following one very specific battle plan, that which was laid out by Paul in his letter to Timothy. We call it 1 Timothy. And this is what Paul said, and this is how early Christianity changed the world. You ready? This is it. Just 1.5 verses. Paul writes, "But you, man of God, flee from all this, all kind of the temptations and the other ways of getting through life, and instead pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And by pursuing these 6 things, that is how you fight the good fight of the faith." That's how you do it. Those 6 things: righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Now, I suspect that this doesn't really land for us today, that this seems like kind of a counterintuitive way to fight the good fight. And I suspect that partly because I grew up in a Christian culture that was very much about fighting the good fight of faith. But the tactics that I grew up hearing about and using were not any of these 6 things. The tactics that the Christianity I grew up with, the way we fought the good fight, was with things like boycotts and apologetics arguments and coercive politics and moralism and shaming of the people that disagreed with us. Those are the ways we fight the good fight of faith. In that case, it's actually no surprise to me that we've seen then a corresponding decline of cultural force of Christianity in our country, because we're not doing the very thing that we were advised to do. The battle plan that was laid out, we have not been following. In that way, I feel like Christians today, kind of as a group, remind me very much of Elsa's parents in the movie Frozen. Anyone seen the movie Frozen? That movie drives me nuts because the actions of the parents at the beginning are baffling. Have you guys thought about this? So these parents, king and queen, they have 2 daughters, and their oldest daughter, she has magic powers that are a little dangerous. She even hurts her little sister. And so they take their daughters to the magic trolls, and the trolls tell the parents what to do. And here's how the opening of the movie Frozen should have gone.
She will be okay.
But she won't remember I have powers?
It's for the best.
Listen to me, Elsa. Your power will only grow. There is beauty in it, but also great danger. You must learn to control it. Fear will be your enemy.
So you're saying we should lock her up alone in a castle until she's safe to be around?
What? That's not what I said. That's a terrible idea. No.
So you're saying we should teach her to be scared of herself?
Are you even listening? I just said fear is her enemy.
So you're saying to teach her to bundle all her feelings up till she gets this freedom complex? And wait and see if she gets over this whole powers thing?
Oh, wow. You guys are bad parents. No, I'm not saying to do any of those things.
So you're saying...
Stop saying so. Every time you say that, you say the wrong thing.
Conceal, don't feel?
Oh my gosh, the answer is love. Okay? Wow. Love thaws, pure love heals. Okay.
Right? The rest of the movie drives me nuts because he was so clear with them. You know, fear is going to be our enemy. And then they go home and they do the things that are going to absolutely ramp up her fear. And then they're surprised that she grows up emotionally damaged. Like, it was as clear as could be, and they got off course. And so in the same way, we have not been doing these 6 things, and then there's a bit of a surprise again, or blaming outside threats, when the answer is we just got to get back to what we were originally told to do: righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And one more just piece of evidence on this point before I move on is we know that we're not doing it. And we know that we're not doing it because there are Christians that ask. They ask how we're doing. In fact, there's a company called Barna. It's a Christian survey company. And every few years, they ask people in the United States, they do surveys, and they say, well, you know, what are your views on religious topics? And every few years, they ask non-Christians, what are your views on Christians? And the most recent one is from 2019, and they gave a list of adjectives, and they said, which ones most describe Christians, which ones least describe Christians? And the most agreed upon adjectives, again, by non-Christians, their views on American Christians today are that they are politically conservative, narrow-minded, homophobic, misogynistic, racist, and foolish. And the least agreed is that Christians are good-humored, encouraging, hopeful, generous, friendly, or caring. Now, I don't think you or I are narrow-minded or homophobic, but my point is this, that if this is the public perception of Christianity, then you and I have our work cut out for us. We have a lot to do to overcome this perception of who we are. And the good news is, you know, it's probably going to be a really powerful, tactical plan against this public perception. Next slide. Righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Right? Can you see it? That even now, these words were given 2,000 years ago, but even now, you can see how these things would go so far, would be so powerful against the perception that Christianity has today, right? So last week, Dion Garrett talked about righteousness and godliness. Today, I want to talk about faith and love. Faith and love. And we have an issue already. It's kind of similar to last week, where Dion talked about how righteousness and godliness, these are words that people don't know, and so that's why it's hard for us to live them out. Well, we have a different problem today. It's that we think we know faith and love, but we really don't. As one American humorist said a long time ago, I don't know who said it, but it definitely was not Mark Twain. I looked it up. He said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so," right? Not knowing things, that's not that big of a deal. It's the things you think you know that are wrong, that's what really gets us. And righteousness and godliness, nobody thinks they know what those mean. We don't even use those words generally in public. But faith and love, we talk about faith and love a lot. And not just Christians, our culture talks a lot about faith and love. These are big values for us, but my contention is, I think we actually get faith and love wrong. And it's the thinking that we get faith and love right is what's causing so much damage today. And I'll give you just kind of a more simple example of that. I want you to just parse for me, if you're driving in a car and you had this dialogue with your navigator, parse with me how you would understand this interaction. You say, "Do I turn left here?" And they say, "Right here." How many of you turn right? How many of you turn left? Why is there confusion? Well, because as simple and basic of a word as right is, it's got 2 slightly different meanings. And depending on which one you take, you will literally go in opposite directions. You could literally, from the same word, thinking that you understand it, be going 180 degrees completely opposite, depending on how you interpret it. Which is why, by the way, as a son raised by 2 Air Force officers, I got drilled into me early on, you only use the word right when you literally mean turn right. Don't you ever use it in any other context, because you need precision, right? We have to be clear on this. And so if this is our Operation 611, if we're going to be tactical and strategic, we have to be precise. We have to know exactly what we mean when we talk about faith and love. And we have to, and to get there, we have to start with, how did the definitions of these get so muddied to begin with? Why is it that by and large, everyone thinks they know what faith and love means, and yet we have such a broad array of possible connotations to them? And to talk about that, I want to give a little bit of a history lesson, but I'll keep it as tight and short as I can because I know it's not everybody's deal. About 400 years ago, a movement started that has continued to this day. And that movement is called, in our history books, the Enlightenment. Some of you might remember hearing that, the Age of Enlightenment. And what the Enlightenment was people saying that humanity had kind of gotten to the peak of its existence, and that humans were enlightened. We were rational beings. We understood the world and the universe better. And at the same time, a lot of these thinkers recognized that religion had caused a lot of evil in the world. That in fact, a lot of the wars that were going on at that time were religious wars. It was Catholics fighting against Protestants and both of them murdering each other. It was crusades against the Muslims, lots of blood spilled both sides. And so the Enlightenment philosophers of the 16 and 1700s said, what if we jettisoned all that baggage of religion and God stuff, but we kept all the things of God? See, the Enlightenment was ultimately saying, can we have the positive moral values of religion without needing religion? That was the idea. And in fact, the United States is itself the culminating example of the Enlightenment experiment. All of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, all these guys, some of them were Christians, some of them weren't, but all of them were influenced by this idea that we could start a country that would have all of these great moral values and none of the messy God religious stuff. And that's why, think about the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is famous for one line, and the line is not, God says we should love our neighbors because they are made in the image of God. It doesn't say that. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So you get rid of God as the justification, but you keep the values. And so the idea was, could we build a country, could we build a society around these principles of things like human dignity and justice and freedom and equal opportunity for prosperity, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Could we have all of these things even if we intentionally leave God out of it? That's the whole separation of church and state. And what's crazy is, it's kind of worked. It's not been a terrible experiment. Over the last 250 years or so, since 1776, we've gotten along okay. Now, I believe we're starting to come to the end of that experiment, and some of the division and the hostility we're seeing today is because we are seeing the limits. But at least understand that the reason it worked for a long time is because the truths and the values of God are so powerful that even if you don't believe in God yourself, you don't have a relationship with God, they will still be very effective in a well-lived life, right? If you believe in honesty, not just because God tells you not to lie, but just because it's a good principle, in general, life's gonna go better for you. You're gonna build positive relationships, people are gonna trust you, you're gonna have a better or good life. Or respecting your parents, that's probably a good idea, even if you don't believe in a God who gave us 10 commandments and said you should respect your parents. You see, these values, these virtues, these principles, they have power on their own. Up to and including these principles like faith and love. See, faith and love are pretty valuable, but what happens is when you divorce them from the source of their definition, from their meanings, then they start to shift and to mold and to evolve, that they start to expand to accommodate a more general, vague definition, and what we get is people are still using the same words and meaning very different things. And that's how we've gotten to this place we're in now, that we can talk about faith and love and yet mean opposite things from someone else who's using the same words. Let's start with the word faith. So faith, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. If you ask a person on the street, they're gonna say all different things. It's like faith, well, that's personal, that's private, that's not necessarily a public thing. Or maybe faith it's subjective. It's not something you can prove or with an experiment, so it's not objective, it's subjective. Or faith, it's sincere. It's something that really matters to you, it's really important to you, and that's a good thing. Or faith is maybe less about feelings and more about your beliefs. It's about what you understand and how you think the world works. Or maybe faith is opposed to science, right? Science is reasonable and rational, empirical. Faith is irrational. And ultimately in the dialogue these days, sometimes people talk about faith as being naive. We have a lot of different understandings of faith. And so when we talk about it with people, we at least here in the war room, we've got to be really crystal clear about what kind of faith we mean. And so let me start by saying the kind of faith that we don't mean. I don't mean any of these things when I talk about faith. The Bible doesn't mean any of these things when it talks about faith. But this is what faith has to mean when you live in a pluralistic society that's a part of an Enlightenment experiment that says that faith is a value, but you're not allowed to have faith in one particular thing and say that that's right or wrong compared to anyone else, right? Because the idea with separation of church and state is that you have to have pluralism. You can't say my faith is better than yours or my faith is true and your faith is wrong because then that would be the state, dictating what the church needs to be. And so one of the hidden values of our country is pluralism, but we also still value faith. And so when you take faith and pluralism and you mix them together, it strips away a lot of the things that faith used to mean, and it leaves us actually with only one thing left that faith is allowed to mean in public discourse, and it's this thing right here, sincerity. There's a great Peanuts comic strip from about 70 years ago where Linus is very obsessed. If you guys remember it or you've seen any of the specials, Linus believes that there is a great pumpkin who comes out every Halloween and gives gifts to all the children of the world, all the good little children. And he's sharing that with Charlie Brown, and Charlie Brown says, "You're crazy." And Linus says, "All right, fine. So you believe in Santa Claus, and I'll believe in the great pumpkin. The way I see it, it doesn't matter what you believe, just as long as you're sincere," right? Now, what's funny is this was a punchline in a comic strip in the 50s. I don't think Charles M. Schulz meant this as a defining way to live your life, except that over the 70 years or so since, this has actually become the way we're allowed to talk about faith, the way the culture has embraced faith as a positive virtue, but in a very different way. That faith is, you can't say that someone else is right and you're wrong. You can't have an objective valuation of their beliefs. All you can talk about is the level of sincerity, right? So then you can call someone out if they're being a hypocrite, if they're insincere, if they're being inconsistent in their arguments, but you cannot judge the objective quality of their faith. You can only talk about the sincerity of it. And this understanding has permeated everywhere. I see it especially in our students. We have young people here and they love Jesus, they believe in Christianity, they're here in worship, they're volunteering on Sunday mornings, they love Jesus. And yet if you ask them, they have embraced this definition of faith. They will say, you know what, I've got so many friends at school that believe different things than me, and I like my friends, I think they're good people, I don't want to think about bad things happening to them, and so they've landed on this cultural definition that it doesn't matter what you believe, specifically, just as long as you're sincere. And that's the way that we're allowed to talk about faith. And when we talk about it, even here on the stage, we talk about faith, it lands for these people as, oh yeah, faith, just whatever you believe as long as it's sincere. Now, some of the people listening here, especially the older generations, you recognize the problem with that. But more traditional Orthodox Christians, we have a different connotation for faith. It is the way we get it wrong too. See, we recognize that faith can't just be about sincerity, but where we kind of swing the pendulum back the other way is we say faith. Faith is about having the right beliefs. And faith is specifically about intellectual assent. It's about having all of your doctrines figured out. Faith becomes a thing that you do argue about because there is a right thing to believe and a wrong thing to believe. And how we figure that out, that's what we've got to wrestle with. And the way that we fight the good fight, the way that we influence people in the name of Christianity is we stand up for the right beliefs of faith. And I'm here to tell you that is wrong too. Not my opinion, biblically. That is wrong. That when the Bible defines faith, it does not define it as a set of beliefs. In fact, it contrasts that. It says the demons have the right beliefs and they tremble. They hate them. That's not the definition of faith. The clearest, most succinct definition of faith in the Bible comes from Hebrews chapter 11. It says this. It says, now faith, what is it? It is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That's it. Faith is confidence and assurance. Faith is hope. Now again, these are fancy, bigger, multi-syllable words, so let me really boil it down. Faith is trust. That's what the Bible means when it talks about faith. Faith is trust. Not believing the right things, not a sincerity and a consistency in your actions. Faith boiled down is nothing more, nothing less than trust. And when I think of it this way, it helps bring a lot of clarity to me in whether I'm living out these virtues in my life, whether I'm following the tactical plan that Paul gives us in 1 Timothy 6:11 or not. Because if faith is trust, then I have to ask myself, and I invite you to ask yourself the same, what do I actually trust in, right? Not what do I believe about God. I have a lot of beliefs about God. I went to seminary where I got 4 years of beliefs about God drilled into me. What do I trust? And when I force myself to confront that question, I'll share with you, and you can do your own reflecting. I realize that I am myself a child of the Enlightenment. That if I'm being honest, I trust in the things of God far more than I trust in God himself. Right? I realize I put my trust in having neighbors who share the same values that I have. I put my trust in a fair system that says if I work hard, there will always be a job waiting for me that pays well enough to support me and my family. I trust that if I just do good, moral, righteous living, that everything else will fall into place in my life and there'll be no unforeseen catastrophes. I trust in a stable government and a powerful military that keeps external threats at bay so that freedom and prosperity are achievable for me. Those are actually the things I trust in, if I'm honest with myself. And the scary thing about trusting in those things is that those are constantly under threat. I can trust in my work ethic until I get cancer and suddenly my health and my livelihood are taken away from me in one fell swoop. I trust in a social, moral system until I have neighbors move in that don't share the same traditions and values I do, and now there's a threat living right next door. I trust in stability until the government seems more dysfunctional than ever and the citizens are more hostile, and suddenly I realize trusting in the things of God is insufficient. And a lot of my own anxiety and my fears today, they're not happening because the world has gotten scarier. They're happening because I have misplaced the source of my trust. And ultimately, the only faith thing that will sustain me is trusting that there is a God who is powerful enough, more powerful than anything around me, and who cares enough about my well-being that he will see my life through well. Because there's a God who loves me. See, and that brings us to the second virtue that we've got to talk about today. What does it mean that God loves me? And how is that a thing that impacts the way I have faith in my life and in the world? And in the same way, our culture loves love. You will get no arguments from anyone when you say love is important, we should all have love. Everybody of every belief system, every faith background, everyone's gonna say, absolutely, amen, brother, love is great. But I hope by now you're recognizing because they've got a different definition of love than what the Bible shares. And I get why it's tricky. There's so many different kinds of love. There's family love and brotherly love and romantic love and love for a career or a passion or a hobby. There's all these kinds of love in the world. But what I've observed is, as someone whose job it is to try to understand the social trends and how God calls us to interact, what I've observed is that when our culture, including a lot of Christians, when we talk about love, we have one very specific definition in mind, and it's this. That in our culture, love simply means liking anything or person that makes you feel good. But also, if and only if, as long as it makes you feel good, right? So love just means that there is a thing that makes me feel good, and so I can just describe that by saying, and I love that. I love that thing. I love my spouse as long as they stay attractive and they support my career goals and they help me raise kids, right? As long as they do all those things, I love my spouse. I love my job as long as it pays me well enough for the stress that I endure. I love my hobbies and passions as long as they bring me pleasure and delight and stave off boredom, right? We love things only insofar and as long as they make us feel good. That's the definition of love I think most people are working with, and that's permeated our culture. And that's why love has become this thing that's nice to talk about. It is not this powerful force that you would think it should be. It's certainly not something that when you hear Paul talk to Timothy, that love is the thing that changes the world. Why? If love's just this feeling, how can it possibly be something that can transform an empire, can change our relationships? And so thankfully, Paul also goes into a little more detail on love. 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter, and unfortunately, you tend to only hear it at weddings these days, which makes it feel like it's only a thing that applies to weddings or to romantic love. But in fact, 1 Corinthians 13 is part of our battle plan. It's part of our tactical efforts to use love in a transformative way. And here's what Paul says, 1 Corinthians 13:1. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but I do not have love, then I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge. And if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, well, then I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, I give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Now, so far, this is beautiful, beautiful poetry, isn't it? But I want you to notice something, that even if you have the watered down cultural definition of love, this sounds great. Right? This is saying you can do good works and have wisdom and knowledge and give to the poor, do miracles, and none of that matters as much as having something or some person in your life that makes you feel good. Isn't that nice? And isn't the Bible so affirming that I should have things in my life that make me feel good? It actually reinforces this idea that the watered down definition of love is ultimately a self-seeking concept. Love is saying that as long as it makes me feel good, I love it. But then love itself is selfish. And so far in 1 Corinthians 13, that sounds good. It sounds like Paul is giving us permission to be selfish. And that's why you can read this and people will not have any problems with this. They won't argue with the Bible. They say, yeah, absolutely, love. Love is better than all those things. But then Paul gets a little more specific. And this is where the cultural definition of love starts to fall out of step with what Paul is describing here in the Bible. He keeps going. He says, love is patient. People are like, well, yeah, up to a point. Love is kind. Yeah, if it's not too much of trouble. Love does not envy, it doesn't boast, is not proud. Okay, fair. Love does not dishonor others. Love is not self-seeking. So this is where it starts to be hard because, again, if you look at your relationships, if you look at love around, we have to recognize that so much of the love that we see, that we talk about, it's the definition of self-seeking. It's the thing that says, if this person or this thing no longer made me feel good, would I still love it? And the answer most of the time is no, which means Paul has got to be talking about a different definition than our cultural one. Love is not easily angered. Well, I don't know now. The people that I love most are the ones that anger me the most. I don't care about people that I don't love, whatever, they don't bother me. I get angered most by the people I love. What is Paul talking about? Love keeps no record of wrongs. I absolutely know all the ways people I love have wronged me. Love doesn't delight in evil, okay? It rejoices with the truth, all right? And then here's where it gets impossible. Paul says love always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. What is he describing? I've never seen love do these things. It's not what the cultural definition of love is. And then he kind of puts the final nail in the coffin. Love never fails. Love never fails. What can Paul be describing? Because love, in fact, always fails. Love never fails. I've seen couples stand in front of an altar say, I'll love you forever, and then they don't. Love never fails. I've seen ride or die friends say, I'm with you through thick and thin, and then the road gets tough and they ditch the caravan. Love never fails. I've seen families who should be tied together by the blood bonds of love, and they're not even speaking to each other anymore. Love never fails. This is either a foolish sentiment or Paul is saying we have to be really rigorous in our definition of what love is because he is describing something that does not match human experience. And it wouldn't, right? Because if the cultural definition of love is liking a thing that makes you feel better, there is no thing, there is no person on earth that will always make you feel better. They will fall short, they will hurt your feelings, they will let you down, and you will be disappointed, and love will end. See, by the cultural definition of love, love is one of the most temporary things out there because it only lasts as long as the thing you love deserves it, and nothing deserves it forever. See, the only way for this to be a true thing that Paul is talking about is that there has to be a kind of love that is not dependent on the ability of a person or a thing to make you feel good. There has to be a kind of love where the doer of the love is perfect, not the receiver of the love. And in fact, that's the kind of love that you and I have. You see, there is a God who we say, and it sounds so nice, God is love, but what does it mean? What it means is that he is the perfect doer of love, and that his actions of love towards us are so perfect, so consistent, that God's love cannot fail. And just as importantly, we can't fail God's love either, because it doesn't depend on us. We don't have to earn it. We don't have to merit it or deserve it. We don't have to make God feel better about himself. And that's why Paul can talk with a straight conscience about a love that never fails. You see, what we've been describing this whole time is this concept that Martin Luther really summarized well. He says that there are really two different kinds of love in the world. And the first kind that we've been talking about is called human love. And human love works a certain way. But then there's this divine love that works a different way. And it's getting those differences understood is when we will finally start to unpack love rightly. Here's how Martin Luther summarizes it. He says, divine love, the love of God, it does not find, but instead creates that which is pleasing to it. The love of man, human love, it comes into being through that which is pleasing to it. Now, these are 500-year-old monk words, so let me make it really simple. What he's saying is human love only loves things that already deserve it. Things that are already pleasing and valuable, then we love them. But God's love, divine love, loves a thing first, and it's that act of love that makes the thing pleasing and valuable and loveworthy. That's the difference. That God's love, divine love, it goes first, and in the act of loving, it makes the recipient better. It transforms something that may or may not have been deserving of love, but now it is because God loved him first. And if you needed to hear this, if you didn't know this, that is how God sees you. Every single one of you. There is not a human being in history, there is not a man, woman, or child that God looked at them and said, I'll love you when you deserve it. God looks at us and he says, I made you, and so I love you. That's it. End of story. And there's nothing that you and I can do to be more worthy of God's love, and just as important, there's nothing we can do to be less worthy of God's love. It's not a thing that we can ruin or mess up. God's love is the constant. It's the standard. And his love actually makes us love-worthy. Now, maybe that sounds ridiculous. It's a pretty absurd claim to make, except that there is still one area of life where we see this played out. One thing that helps us connect and understand in just some small way how God can love us whether we deserve it or not, and it's a parent towards a baby. If you ask parents of a newborn, there is nothing about the baby that makes them feel better those first few months, right? It's a stinky, crying mess that keeps you from sleep. But even though it doesn't make you feel better, parents love that baby. And in the act of loving the baby, they actually make the baby something better. That baby grows up and being loved, it gets a personality and talents and gifts, a story, and this baby becomes something of value because parents poured out love into that baby for years and for decades. That's the picture of divine love, that it is the act of love that actually makes us valuable and loveworthy. And these are the ways we have to understand faith and love if we want to be using them effectively to transform a world, a nation, and our relationships. So let me summarize it here in a way that hopefully helps bring it home. See, at the end of the day, faith and love are directional virtues. That means that they have to be aimed at something. You can't faith or love in a vacuum. You either have to have faith in something, you have to express love toward something. So that's what I mean when I say faith and love are directional values, which means that there's kind of two aspects to the virtue. So with faith, there's the quality, with both of them, there's the quality of your effort, And then there's the quality of the object that the virtue is aimed towards. So for faith, that means that you have the quality of your effort is how sincere are your beliefs? How well do you put your trust in something? And then there is the trustworthy source. There's the thing that you are putting your faith in. And it's the same with love. There's how well are you loving towards the thing that you're expressing love towards, this love-worthy being. This is the dynamic of faith and love. It's how it's always got to be. So now you guys, are you ready for this? I hope this is helpful because this is really important. That the cultural understanding of these two things emphasizes one of these facets over the other. All right, let me be clear. So the cultural faith, the human love, here's what it does, is it emphasizes only half of the virtue. So cultural faith says that the only thing that matters is how sincere your beliefs are. Doesn't matter what you believe in. Doesn't matter what the trustworthy source is, irrelevant. Believe in God, believe in Allah, believe in Buddha, believe in yourself. Doesn't matter. All that matters is how sincere are your beliefs. How consistent and integrated are you in those beliefs that you hold? That's the thing that is valued in the cultural definition of faith. And what's interesting is, in the human definition of love, it's switched. They say, actually, your effort in love doesn't really matter. What matters is the quality of the thing that you are loving. Does it deserve your love? And the only question is, does it deserve your love or not? If it deserves your love, then you should love it. If it doesn't deserve your love, then you should move on. Don't love it. And I have this conversation, I'll tell you, all the time as I talk with couples that are facing divorce. Because what they will tell me over and over again is, I just don't love my spouse anymore. I just don't love them. And I'll ask them, what are you doing to show love towards your spouse? And they look at me like I'm crazy. Why would I show love towards my spouse? They're not worth loving. They've changed. They're not who I married. They're a different person. They're not worthy of love anymore. So this is irrelevant, whether they put action into, whether they put effort into loving them. Because the only thing that matters, based on this kind of watered down enlightenment definition of faith and love, with faith, the only thing that matters is your effort. With love, the only thing that matters is the object. Now, you guys ready for this? They've gotten it entirely backwards. That if we want to live out love and faith the way Paul describes it, the way the Bible invites us to do, the tactical battle plan of Operation 611, if we want to get faith and love right, we have to reverse it. It's literally backwards. See, biblical faith says that actually we're flawed, broken human beings, and frankly, we're not that good at believing stuff anyway. Our faith, it fails. We have doubts. We don't keep up with our disciplines and our habits. We don't read the Bible enough. We don't pray enough. And it's okay because that's just how we are. But thankfully, we have the most trustworthy source in the universe, the God who made it in the first place. And that even though our efforts may fail, God's work on the cross will not fail. It never ceases to be true that Jesus Christ died for you and for me, whether we struggle to believe it or not. You see, the thing about a biblical faith is that God is the most trustworthy source, and we don't have to sweat the small stuff. We don't have to panic or be anxious that maybe we're not believing well enough, because it pales in comparison to a God who does all the work on our behalf. But then, ironically, love is flipped too. That divine love, as opposed to human love, the worthiness of the object is almost irrelevant. It's like what we just sang in the song before the message. We said, when we were your foe, God, you still fought for us. When we were still his enemies, we were not worthy of his love. Still, he died on the cross and conquered death for us. And by doing that, then we end up becoming love worthy. But the point is, the actions are not dependent on this. We love people because God first loved us. We express caring actions towards people whether they deserve it or not. And if we get this right, if we live out a faith that is us just trusting in God because he is worth trusting in, when we love people regardless of whether they deserve it or not, we change empires. We redeem relationships. We get friends and family back from the brink. Suddenly, nothing stays the same when we get biblical faith and divine love right. And I hope that this helps you see that this is not just some nice hallmark sentiment that Paul is saying in 1 Timothy 6:11, that faith and love aren't just some feel-good buzzwords, but these are true weapons of divine strength. Weapons that don't kill, weapons that bring life to the world. Weapons that you and I are invited, encouraged, begged by God to use because they'll make everything around us better. And if we engage with these as a community, if we start to live out faith and love as well as the other things from 1 Timothy 6:11, then we will see a change and a transformation in the world around us. Amen. Let's pray. Lord God, I give you thanks that you have been so clear with us, that you have not hidden in confusion or left ambiguous words, but you have given us such clear direction. You've shown us how you invite us to interact with this world. You've made over and over again, it's so obvious how much you love us and what you're willing to do to bring us back from the brink. And so, Lord, I pray now that you would help it settle into every heart here, that you are trustworthy, that you have proven over and over again throughout human history that you will not be defeated, that your ways cannot be thwarted, that your redemptive plan for each person here will never fail. And Lord, I pray that that trust in you would take shape in us through our ability to love people, not because we need anything from them, not because they deserve it, but just simply because that's our way to pay forward the way you have loved us. And to recognize that when we love without agenda, when we commit to caring for the people around us, regardless of what they can do back for us, that not only their lives will change, but our lives will change as well. So Lord, help us to follow the plan that you have laid out for us. Help us to be strategic citizens of your kingdom, as well as influencers of this world. Lord, continue to use us in mighty and powerful ways through the faith and the love that you've made available to us. We pray this all trusting in your name. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. It's such an honor to worship with you. If you need anything throughout the week, we have resources and contact information over on our website, pathfinderscl.org. When you're there, you can also look in our messages section. We have a podcast where you can carry the encouraging messages with you wherever you go. Now, if you had a chance, could you like, share, or comment on this video? Every time you do that, it's a way to make sure that these encouraging words, the messages that are shared at Pathfinder, reach more people. So simply by liking, sharing, and commenting this video, you'll help these messages get out there. So thank you for doing that. And finally, I just hope you have an amazing week, and I can't wait to see you next week.